1998 was a very good year. You had the Ocarina of Time, StarCraft, Half-Life, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil 2, and the Fizmo. Let's talk about the Fizmo. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the Ensoniq Fizmo, the most late 90s synth I've ever seen. It literally looks like those paper cups. Literally, they're called jazz cups that you saw in doctor's offices and high schools and middle schools. Basically, the ubiquitous cup from the late 90s. Here's a picture of it. Here's the Fizmo. Take a look at the picture. It's the same thing, slightly different color scheme, but totally a late 90s synth. And when you listen to it, it sounds like late 90s video game sounds and music. It's very, very much of that era. Also kind of a legendary synth. It was the last synth that Ensoniq made. It came out in a mess when Ensoniq was merging with EMU underneath the company, I forget the name, Creative Labs. Creative Labs bought Ensoniq and EMU and merged them, and out of that mess came the Fizmo, which apparently the name itself was a joke, but it was such a mess in the release, nobody realized it was a joke, and they just released the synth with the name Fizmo. Didn't really mean anything, it was kind of just a jokey name, but they released it with it. But this synth has a kind of a cult following. It went against the grain of the time, which was kind of VA synths, virtual analog. And this was not another Me Too virtual analog synth. This was a very strange trans wave synth. It was its own thing, and it's been described as like a very postmodern, experimental type sound, and truly it is. I think it's in the lineage of the Polyevolver from Dave Smith, also equally kind of odd and kind of all over the place sonically in a good way. The Fizmo belongs in that lineage. I think in today's kind of synth world, the Op 6 also goes to these strange places. They all do it in different ways, but they're synths that create these incredibly complex sounds with just a simple chord. You can create these incredibly lush, complex sounds that just go on, and you kind of, with their modulations and kind of things that they're doing, they're very fun to play and kind of get lost in. What is unique about the Fizmo? The Fizmo is a transwave synth, which is a sequence of waves that you were able to change the start and loop point on in real time on the Fizmo. So it is very interesting because you can, with the I knob, you can change the loop point in the transwave, which again is a kind of complex wavetable made up of a bunch of different wavetables. I'm not 100% sure I described that accurately, but that is kind of what I understood as I was reading about it. But really, it is got a lot of motion in its wavetable. So there's, I think, like 54 different wavetables, and you can change, like I said, you can change the start point. You can also change the loop point. And so you're kind of able to mash up these wavetables and create all these modulations and movements inside the wavetable that is not like a traditional wavetable synth. So that's kind of what's under the hood and what's part of the magic of the Fizmo. It's 48 voices. It's also interesting in that each patch is made up of 4 sounds, which is made up of 2 oscillators on each sound, so you get some really complex layered sounds, and you can split it across, you can layer it on top of itself. So you can do different things there, which allows also for some really complex multi-timbrality. The arpeggiator has a bunch of different patterns, and the effects are kind of the legendary Ensoniq VLSI 24-bit effects that also, I think there's like 40 something effects built in as well. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of modulation options, a lot of effects. It's got a vocoder. Pretty powerful little synth. The wavetables themselves, the trans wavetables, I think are 16-bit, so a little bit lower fi. And to me, sonically, it's like the Polyevolver and the Kawai K4 had a baby. There's a lot of artifacts and kind of, it's a dirty sound. It's got a lot of kind of grit and dirt, especially when you start moving things around with the different knobs. You can get some really odd artifacts that aren't always entirely pleasant to listen to, but it also goes to really some interesting places sonically, and it's nice to listen to these evolving patches and play around with them. Some of the patches are really, you cannot play more than a single note because there's so much movement. It's kind of defeats the purpose of having a keyboard. It's almost like an on-off for the note because it's so complex. It's too much to play more than a single note or a single chord. So definitely interesting synth. It's divided. People are divided. Some people don't like the way it sounds. Everybody finds it interesting and it's wild, but the sound isn't for everybody. The filter isn't particularly pleasant to listen to. It's all digital, which isn't a bad thing. It's just that's what it is. The story on it is interesting. Apparently, Ensoniq and Emu were culturally very different companies that got blended together in their acquisition, and the Ensoniq culture was very much of a kind of push it to market as quickly as possible, and then Emu culture was much more kind of systematic, process-driven, and that did not go well together. And ultimately what happened is that Creative Labs took all the engineers from these two companies and had them go work on sound cards and video cards, not video cards, sound cards for kind of the golden era of PC gaming. It was a big PC gaming company, and synthesizers were simply not making enough money, so they went and had them go work on sound cards for computers, and that was the end of the legendary Ensoniq and Emu companies. This was the last kind of half-baked product. Apparently there is a software editor that was discontinued. Someone's recreated one that allows you to get to a lot of hidden parameters that you can't get to without it, and that is kind of a bummer, especially in the effects section. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but there's hidden features. There's also a lot of kind of misinformation on the web, or information that is now missing altogether because this is very 90s of this whole entire synth as well. It was built on like an Adobe Flash site or Yahoo Forms, which no longer exist either. So this is a little bit of a mystery synth in terms of what it's capable of, in terms of what are the actual hidden parameters. There's not good information out there. So let's take a listen and we'll conclude with some final thoughts. So there you have it, the Ensoniq Fizmo. These puppies go for a couple grand. You can find them for $2 to $4 grand, depending on where you're looking. They're pretty expensive. Apparently only no one really knows, but the number is somewhere between 500 and 2,000 units were made altogether. It was not successful at the time. It was poorly marketed and was against the trend of kind of VA synths of that era. Also, it is, there was a rack mount version where even less of those were made. I think maybe something like 500. So for me personally, it's very interesting. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I don't know if I love it or if I'm not superly partial to it. I'm kind of on the fence. I think sometimes I'm like, wow, that's really interesting, but it's also sonically very painful at times to listen to. It goes to places that it's unwieldy, a little wild, and some of the places it goes sonically are kind of just unpleasant, although they are kind of interesting. So I'm not 100% how I feel about it personally. The F, I should say, the F controls kind of an effects destination. The I controls your loop point on the transwave. The Z is a filter control. The M is kind of a detune, and the O is assignable. That's the Fizmo knobs down there. I think that's a question that people ask a lot of times. It's nice to have those all on the front. It's nice that there's so many knobs to control the sound. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I could find out about this synth. I would love, if there's more info out there, please share it below. I might make a follow-up video comparing this to some other synths from the 90s. Definitely an interesting piece of history and a footnote on Ensoniq's kind of path as a company. Its tragic path towards computer gaming, ironically. I'm a big fan of that era of computer gaming, so maybe I benefited in some way. But would love to hear your thoughts on the Fizmo. What other synths should we look at that have been forgotten by time or were kind of lost in the era that are of interest? Please leave your comments below. If you want to talk more, you can find us at almamusic.com. We'd love to find you there. Again, if you didn't hit subscribe already, I'd appreciate it. If you want to see more content like this, and thank you for watching.